If you are conducting audits and don't have the proper training and records to prove it, you are likely to end up in trouble when you are being audited. Now, checking internal auditors' competence is one favorite area for third-party auditors to check. I'm Peter Sebelius, and I'm the member of the committee that is updating the ISO 19011 guideline on auditing. In this video, I will share what competence you should or even must have as an auditor in a medical device industry context. Now, the most important principle in terms of competence for an auditor is that you should be competent enough to achieve the intended result of the audits that you conduct. Competence is actually defined in the ISO 9000 standard. It's the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. The ISO 19011 standard includes no less than 6 pages relating to competence and evaluation of auditors. That is just 1 page less than the most comprehensive clause in ISO 13.5, namely product realization. Now, this should tell us that auditor competence is important, and there is a lot to be done to ensure that you or other auditors are competent. Taking a course on auditing is one such thing. Now, speaking of ISO 13485, there is a subclause that relates to human resources. It says that personnel performing work affecting product quality shall be competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, skills, and experience. This would be the short version of all the 6 pages that are written in ISO 19011 about the auditor's competence. There is one thing I want to clarify in regards to affecting product quality. I don't want you to think that the term affecting product quality only relates to people that are directly involved in development and production. It is much broader than that, and it most certainly includes auditors. In fact, there are 3 areas where auditors typically look for more comprehensive evidence of competence when auditing medical device organizations, and they are risk management, internal auditing, and PRRC, person responsible for regulatory compliance. The latter is assuming the organization is placing medical devices on the EU market. Now, these are areas where auditors typically look for course certificates, and not just that people have read and understood a procedure. So make sure that you finish an appropriate course, for example, the one that you can find on medicaldevicehq.com, get the course certificate and save it for the future, should your organization be audited. And yes, Medical Device HQ also offers courses on risk management and PRRC. What competencies must an auditor have? Well, firstly, it's about personal behavior. This is the area which might be the most difficult to acquire because it basically goes back to your personality or intellectual capacity. And the attributes that you need to possess as an auditor in turn go back to the audit principles that I have covered in other videos. Now, you should be ethical, which includes that you are fair, truthful, honest, and discreet. This is relating to the audit principles, fair presentation, and confidentiality. You should be open-minded, which includes that you are willing to consider alternative ideas and points of views. Not every quality management system will be implemented the way that you might prefer. You have to accept that. Now, you should be diplomatic. A lot of people will find it extremely challenging to be questioned or receive non-conformities when they're being audited. Thus, the need to be diplomatic. You should be observant. If you walk by something that is obviously a non-conformity when conducting the audit activities, you should notice it. This is just common sense, and the ability to observe is different from person to person. My 11-year-old son, he can walk through his room, and then you ask him if the room is clean or messy, and he will always think that it's clean, although it looks like a museum of chaos. Now, obviously, 11-year-olds don't do audits, but I'm sure you know that some people will simply not observe things around them in the same way that others do. And if you're not good at observing, you need to practice it. ISO 19011 includes 9 more behaviors or personal attributes. I'll not go through them in detail in this video. I recommend you to take a full course on auditing or to review the standard and read up on them yourself. Now let's turn to knowledge and skills. Firstly, when you're an auditor, you need to have knowledge and skills in the audit process and the audit principles that are behind the audit process. But you also need to have an understanding of management systems. This is both a general understanding of management systems, but also sector-specific knowledge, such as in the case of the ISO 13.5. You need to understand the organization's context. If you don't understand general business and management concepts, it will simply be very difficult to audit an organization and understand what's being said and what's going on. And the last item on my list, you need to understand regulatory requirements. Knowledge about regulatory requirements should not be understood as you have to have legal expertise, but the tricky part is that ISO 13485 refers to regulatory requirements in general. It could, for example, be the MDR, the QSR, GDPR, HIPAA, or other applicable regulations. I'm not saying that you need to know these regulations fully when you audit with ISO 13485 as audit criteria, because then there would be no end to it, but you need to have some basic knowledge of the regulations that are applicable. Now, those were the high-level personal behaviors, knowledge, and skills that you should have to be a successful auditor for audits that are conducted on site. How can you attain the knowledge and skills? Well, one way is to attend an internal auditor course. Do remember what I said at the beginning of this video. Third-party auditors almost always check records of competence of training for internal auditors, so make sure you have a course certificate from a relevant training course. Now, so far, I've spoken about on-site audits. Do you need the same skill set for audits using remote auditing methods? Well, you do, and then some. And let me go over what they would be. According to ISO TS 17012, you should be comfortable with using technology. If you're not at all tech savvy, maybe using remote auditing methods is not for you, or you will simply have to practice more. You need to have patience. Personally, I think you need to have patience in all kinds of auditing situations. But with remote auditing methods, things can be even slower than they are when you meet face to face. And if you get high blood pressure from waiting for people to get their microphones unmuted, I recommend my approach, which is to think about how much time you saved on travels when you do the audit using remote auditing methods. You can have quite a few technical issues during an audit while still saving time compared to traveling to the auditee. Now, you should be sensitive to digital data privacy. During the pandemic, I did almost 100 one-day classroom sessions with 8 to 10 people on every classroom session, where everyone had their cameras active the whole time in their homes. I've seen so many naked people in the background of those classroom sessions. This is one perspective on digital data privacy, but it can also be not to take screen captures of personal information and thereby spreading it unnecessarily, or encourage people to blur the background to avoid showing naked people in the background. And lastly, I want to mention adaptability. Disasters can happen when conducting an audit on site, but they are in most cases more frequent when using remote auditing methods. There are simply so many more technical things that could go wrong. The nice thing, however, is that when things do go wrong, it's usually much easier to reschedule compared to if you need to do a 5-hour flight to visit the auditee. Setting up another meeting to continue the audit is usually super simple in comparison. What about knowledge and skills then? Well, ISO TS 17012 mentions 9 additional things in knowledge and skills that are relevant to remote auditing methods. To be honest, they are just common sense. For example, you need to understand risks associated with remote auditing methods and how using remote auditing methods will impact the audit plan, and so on. Another such skill is to be able to mitigate disruptive behavior at the remote location, for example, when someone is late, inattentive, or argumentative. But these things you need to know or be able to do also when physically conducting an audit. Telling someone to pay attention in person or in a Teams meeting is not that different if you ask me. Having said that, I'm not going to be bringing up those 9 additional bullet points in this video. What I will say, however, is that you should not underestimate the added time it takes to set up an audit that uses remote auditing methods, or to conduct the audit activities for that matter. In my experience, it will be slightly slower than if you meet face to face. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of using remote auditing methods, as it saves both time and the environment when fewer trips need to be made. I'm just saying you need to take it into account when preparing and planning the audit. Thanks for watching this video. Please do subscribe to this channel, or follow me or Medical Advice HQ on LinkedIn, or why not both. You will see a lot of interesting posts from us if you do, and I hope to see you there or on one of my courses.